Welcome to the Amazing Greats podcast, where we have a unique opportunity to talk with people you know from movies, music, sports, books, or politics. It's a real and raw conversation about their life, their career, and how faith has played a role in it. No preaching or teaching, and no church experience is required. Today, join your host, a radio veteran for over 30 years from San Diego. Here's Greg Cook. Buckle up, and here we go.
Thanks, Joe. My guest is Ken Blanchard, who has authored or co-authored over 65 books, including The 1 Minute Manager, released in 1982, which sold over 15 million copies, translated into over 40 languages. Besides English, Ken, do you have a favorite version of The 1 Minute Manager in a different language?
Well, the first one was in Japanese, and that was really special because when our book came out, right before that, all the books that were big sellers in management were talking about Japanese management. Mm-hmm. And so was lucky because Tom Peters' book On Search of Excellence came out, and Nesbitt's book on megatrends and ours all came out together. It looked like America was tired of listening to Japanese management, mm-hmm. and they wanted us. And so our first translation, though, was in Japanese, and it sold a lot in Japanese.
Outstanding. And in 2005, you were elected to the Amazon Hall of Fame as one of the top 25 best-selling authors of all time. Congratulations for that. Some of your books include, and you probably already know this, Raving Fans, 1993, Leadership and the 1 Minute Manager, in which you coined the term Seagull Manager. And I've heard you use that term before, but for those that are watching who've never heard the term Seagull Manager, go ahead and explain what that means.
Well, it's the most popular management style in America. You know, a manager tells people what to do, and then they disappear. And then if they make a mistake, they fly in like a seagull, make a lot of noise, dump on everybody, and then fly out, you know.
That still cracks me up. Also, Gung-Ho, Turn on the People in Any Organization in 1997. Whale Done, The Power of Positive Relationships in 2002. And a couple of books that we'll get into a little bit more today, Lead Like Jesus and Servant Leadership in Action. Ken, you are the name of your company is the Ken Blanchard Companies. And how did you come up with that?
Well, I didn't particularly want it to be named after me, but all the research showed that people like to identify with something and someone. And one of the top companies, the president, and it was named after him. I can't remember the company right now, mm-hmm. but he said, no, people like to identify with people. So everybody said, well, let's call it the Ken Blanchard Companies so that they could recognize that it was me. And
here it is a few decades later, and the name is stuck. So congratulations.
Right. Over 40 years and over 200 people working with us. So it's been fun.
And you are the Chief Spiritual Officer. Explain what that means.
Well, I've never been a good manager per se, you know, in strategic things and all that kind of thing. And so I'm a good head cheerleader. Mm-hmm. And my wife, Margie, one of her roles, she headed up the Office of the Future, besides being president and all. And they studied, you know, what does it take to, you know, in the future, you know, with companies and all. Mm-hmm. And so it was really interesting that it really came out that one of the key issues was, you know, spiritual aspect. And so I decided, well, I'll be the Chief Spiritual Officer and, you know, head cheerleader. So I've left a morning message now for 20 years for our people in our company. And I do three things. One, I praise people for things that have been done well. People tell me who to pray for if somebody's hurting and all. And then I leave an inspirational message. And lately, my wife, Margie, and my daughter-in-law, Madeline, who's married to my son, Scott, and our daughter, Debbie, they're helping out. And so they're doing one morning message a week. So I'm down to only having to do two.
Okay.
But just kind of keeps me thinking, okay, what would people like to hear? What have I read recently that might be inspirational?
Or lift somebody up.
Yeah.
Outstanding. And Ken Blanchard Companies, I should mention for somebody who's not familiar, it's leadership training and development, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's what we've really been. Our goal is to, impact the behavior of people in organizations. Mm-hmm. So when they're at home at night talking to their family, they're going to have positive things to say.
Excellent. Now, you describe yourself as a follower of Jesus. What does that mean to you?
Well, I was on a big radio station a while back, and the guy said, I understand you're very spiritual. What's your faith? I said, I'm a follower of Jesus. And he said, you're a Christian. I said, no, I'm not. Neither was Jesus. Christianity is never mentioned in the four Gospels. And so to me, the action is following Jesus. And I think in a lot of places, Christianity is a negative thing because we still have too many Pharisees in Christianity. They're out judging people and all. And so lead like Jesus is the ministry we have. It's not lead like a Christian. Mm-hmm. And so Jesus is the man.
Right. Now, how did you become a follower of Jesus?
Well, I was actually named after a Presbyterian minister. My middle name is Hartley, and my parents loved this pastor, Bob Hartley, and he was the head of the Presbyterian Church in New Rochelle, New York. And so I went to Sunday school and all those things, and it didn't have too much meaning for me. And in fact, in junior high school, I switched to the Methodist Church because they had a better basketball team, and I was going to play on their team. And then when I went to Cornell, and the Ivy League's not big on faith, and so I kind of drifted away. And then I met Margie right after I graduated, and we decided to get married. And she said, we ought to get back in our faith, and we did, and even ran a junior high school program for a big Presbyterian church in Ithaca, New York, when I was getting my PhD. And then our first teaching job, we went to Athens, Ohio, and I taught in the business school. And the pastor there in town we really liked was a wonderful guy, but he was leading the student sit-ins against the Vietnam War. And his congregation fired him in the most vicious thing we had ever seen. And so we said, if that's what Christianity is all about, you can have it, because we had seen a lot of hypocrisy. And we just turned our backs on it. And our kids were young then, and unfortunately, at 18, if you said, give me the Lord's Prayer, I'll hurt you, you would have had to hurt them. Far away we drifted. And so it wasn't until the 1 Minute Manager came out and was so ridiculously successful. And a good old friend of mine, Phil Hodges, came down and took me on a walk on the beach in La Jolla and said, Ken, why do you think this book is so successful? He's a big believer. And I said, I don't know, Hodge, but God must be involved. And he said, oh, thank God, And the minute I started mentioning God, people started coming into my life. I got invited when I'd be on the Hour of Power with Robert Shula in its heyday. And I get on there and Shula said, Ken, I love the 1 Minute Manager, but who's the greatest 1 Minute Manager of all time? I said, who's that? He said, Jesus. I said, Jesus, really? Because I'd never thought about Jesus as a leader,
right,
per se. And he said, absolutely. He said, he was really clear on goals with his disciples, Isn't that your first secret 1 minute goal setting? Yeah. And he said, you and Tom Peters, you didn't manage management by wandering around, Jesus did. He wanted one from one little village to another. If anybody showed any interest, he'd praise him, heal him. Isn't that your second secret 1 minute praising? Yeah. And if people stepped out of line, he wasn't afraid to give them a 1 minute reprimand. He threw the money lenders out of the temple. Isn't that your third secret 1 minute reprimand? Yeah. And so he said the greatest 1 minute manager of all time. So after that, I started to read the Gospels and just started to laugh, Greg, because everything I had ever written about leadership, Jesus did with these 12 incompetent guys he hired. You wouldn't have hired that lot. And he was a situational leader. He was a 1 minute manager, He built trust and did all the kind of things we teach. And so that's when I really got aboard and really became a follower, because I was saying, wow, Shula was right. He's the greatest leadership role model of all time, and also a pretty amazing leader, too, of our faith.
Right. So I want to, speaking of your faith, has your faith, I think I already know the answer to this, but your faith, how's it been tested?
Well, I told you, it was tested back when I thought, I saw some hypocrisy and all that kind of thing. And then, when I started Lead Like Jesus, I got criticized by the religious right. They said that I was a New Ager disguised as a Christian, and all. And so I just wrote back and sent them my blessings and all that. And so it's always been a test. I think when you're out front about the Lord, it's a test. And I was fortunate to be able to do some programs with Zig Ziglar, and he was the one that taught me how to mention Jesus, in my sessions without offending people. He said, because if you just talk about how it has impacted you and you're not trying to convert anybody, they can't take it away. He said, you can't cut off your right arm, if that's a part of you. And so it's been a fun journey.
Excellent. Now, your day by day, do you pray daily? How do you follow God on a daily basis, or Jesus on a daily basis?
Well, Greg, one of the things when I wrote a book with Norman Vincent Peale, and he's another person who came into my life. In fact, Norman and his wife Ruth said to Margie and I, when we were on our final journey, the Lord's always had you on his team. You just haven't suited up yet. And, but with working with Norman, we decided that we all have two selves. We have an external task-oriented self that's used to getting jobs done, and a thoughtful, reflective self. And which one wakes up quicker in the morning? The alarm goes off. What do? You jump into your task-oriented self. John Ortberg always said to me, great pastor, that why isn't it called the opportunity clock, or it's going to be a great day? No, alarm! Just right into your task on yourself, and you're reading while you're trying to get dressed, and you jump in your car in the old days when you could go to work and you're on the phone, and all that. And you're at one meeting, an air meeting, and you get home at night and you're exhausted and finally fall in bed, fall asleep, don't have the energy to say goodnight, or somebody might be lying next to you. Next day you're out of there again. And pretty soon you're caught in a rat race. And I love Lily Talman, the great, philosopher from Hollywood. She said the problem with a rat race is even if you win it, you're still a rat. And,
Good point.
So one of the things that I learned is that you have to enter your day slowly. And that's when I really tried to do it. What I do in the morning is I have a recumbent bike, and I get on that, and I'm on that for about 30 minutes, and I read a bunch of faith-based material like Jesus Calling, the Daily Word, just all kinds of really good stuff that kind of gets in my mind, the important role that God plays in my life. And then at the end, I go through my prayers, and I use the ACTS formula for prayer. A is adoration. I start off and say, praise you, Lord. You're really unbelievable. I mean, look what you've done even for a deadbeat like me. Confession is when you really kind of fess up the things that you might have done that you wish you had a second chance at, or, you said you were going to do it, you didn't, And so, if you can't think of things that you fess up for, then you probably lie about other things too. T stands for Thanksgiving. What are you thankful for? And I'm just so blessed with Margie in my life, and our little dog Joy, and our home, and our company, and Lead Like Jesus, and so many wonderful people and opportunities. And then the last is S, which is supplication, which is really, asking for what you want. What are you praying for? And in Lead Like Jesus, we have a formula that said to people in the morning, sit on the side of the bed, and first put your hands on your knees and think of all the things you got to do that day, and lay them down at the foot of the cross and let the Lord take care of them. And then put your hands in an upward standpoint and shut your mouth and say, Lord, you got anything to say to me today? And listen. Most of us, when we pray, we don't listen enough. And it's amazing. God does want to talk to you. A friend said that the way you can tell if God's talking to you is if you think of something you never would have thought of yourself. So, give you an example,
Okay.
when I'm driving in the car by myself, I don't turn on the radio anymore. I have got a suggestion from my buddy Wally Armstrong, who was a great golfer, and I wrote the Mulligan book with him about golf and Jesus. I imagine that Jesus is sitting next to me in the car. And so I talk to him, tell him what I've been thinking about. You got any suggestions? And I'll never forget when our pastor left our church a few years ago, and I'm driving home, and he was a good buddy. And I said, well, Lord, what do you think I can do about all that? You know, they're looking for an interim person and all that. And a little while later, all of a sudden I hear, why don't you be interim? You know, now, I didn't hear a voice that say it, but that idea came in my head. And I never would have thought of that myself. So I called over to the church and said, got a crazy idea. What do you think if I be the interim? They said, you do that? And somehow they got it past the presbytery. And so I had a wonderful time for a little over a year and a half, you know, helping organize the church and getting the 4 pastors all preaching. And we just had a wonderful time. So
Sidebar, Ken and I go to the same church. And I remember when you were doing the sermons, and you were great. But I had a private conversation with you one time. We talked about it, and there's a lot of work that goes into a sermon. I mean, I feel for preachers who deliver 30-minute sermons, because we see 30 minutes. We don't see all the work that goes into.
No, I think one of the problems is not a lot of leadership in churches. Is the pastors are doing 45 messages a year. I mean, if you try to give 45 messages a year to the same audience,
yeah,
you don't have any time to do leadership. I remember I asked Norman Vincent Peale. He finally retired at 80. I said, Norman, why did you retire? He said, Blanchard, someday you'll realize it's easier to find a new audience than a new speech.
I want to move to your book, Lead Like Jesus. On the cover, it says lessons from the greatest leadership role model of all time. What made Jesus the greatest leadership role model of all time?
Well, to me, the important thing about leadership isn't what happens when you're there. It's what happens when you're not there. And here, over 2,000 years later, we're still talking about him. And he took these, 11 inexperienced, 12 inexperienced guys, and he set them up to go out and spread the gospel. And it was really amazing. I mean, because the important thing is not when you're there, it's when you're not there. And when he was no longer here in person, that group was amazing. They all risked their lives to spread the message. I mean, how many of you have followers who are willing to die for your message? And, he just took that group and got them all pumped up and talk about a clear vision, which is, what's your purpose? What's your picture of the future? What are your values? He said, come with me, I'll make you fishers of men. Mm-hmm. The picture of the future was to go to make disciples of all, nations and baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then values, disciples knew the 10 commandments were too many. They said, what are the biggies to Jesus? And he said, love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And these 2 commandments, handle it all.
Yeah. How do we lead like Jesus?
Well, what you really need to do is to be a servant leader, because Jesus came to serve, not to be served. And, when I talked about servant leadership initially in business, they think I'm talking about the inmates running the prison or trying to please everybody or some kind of religious movement. But there's 2 parts of servant leadership. And I just talked about the first part, which is vision and direction and values and all. And Jesus really kind of nailed that. And then had some goals under that. It's the responsibility of the hierarchy to make sure everybody knows, what business you're in and where you're headed and all that. And that's the leadership part of servant leadership. And then once that's clear, now you turn the pyramid upside down and now you work for them. And when Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, he was symbolizing for them what they needed to do. He said, just as I have done for you, do for others, and he said, even I have come to serve rather than be served. And so that what we really need is too often leaders are protecting the hierarchy and thinking all the brains are in their office. And so the energy is moving up the hierarchy. And as a customer, if you're dealing with their front line and you got a problem, they won't solve it because they'll say, have you, you can talk to my supervisor. And so you're talking to a duck. They're going, quack, quack, it's our policy, quack, quack. I didn't make the rules, quack, quack, and what you want to do is talk to an eagle, who soars above the crowd. Mm-hmm. And so that I think that's what Jesus really did, is he developed his people to risk their lives for the ministry. In fact, they all were killed, I think, except one, I think, John.
I've got a copy of the book here, Lead Like Jesus, and I highlighted a couple things I want to ask you as we a little bit more about this book. You talk about the being habits, and specifically the habit of accepting and abiding in God's conditional love. So what does that mean?
Well, the biggest problem to leading like Jesus is the human ego. Mm-hmm. We say that ego stands for edging God out, and there's two ways that you edge God out. One is false pride. When you have a more than philosophy, you think you're brighter than and all. And the other is fear of self-doubt, when you have a less than philosophy, and both of them you're focused on yourself. But the important thing, which is really interesting, is that even the people who act like big deals, that people say, yeah, they're the egomaniacs. The guy who wrote "I'm okay, you're okay" said the worst life position is "I'm okay, you're not." And he said all the research shows that people that act like that are really covering up not okay feelings about themselves. Mm. So one of the first things I think is important for leaders to realize that God didn't make any junk, and that they're beautiful, that they have a lot of talent. No, they don't have all the skills that they need to do their job, but they're okay. And the really good leaders who are able to serve and be there with their people are people who are comfortable with themselves, and they have humility. And a lot of people think, well, humility is a weakness. No, I don't. I think it was C.S. Lewis or somebody way years ago. Somebody people give me credit for it, but said people with humility don't think less of themselves. They just think about themselves less, and so it's just so important that you trust the unconditional love of God. Mm-hmm. Loves every single one of us, and that's really important. I was on a call this morning with Miles McPherson, who's a great pastor in San Diego at the Rock Church, and wrote a wonderful book called The Third Option, because the first two options are, I'm who I am, you, and you're black, I'm white, and you get this. And the third option is to realize we're all children of God. And if you look for that pearl of goodness in that, regardless of their race, their creed, their color, their nationality, and dig for that pearl, you'll find it. Even if we disagree on certain things, let's look for the pearl.
Perfect. Developing your own compelling vision. One of the chapters in the book. So how does one do that?
Well, as I mentioned, that Jesus had a compelling vision, was he wanted to make people fishers of men. What it is it's sort of deciding, what business are you in? So like my purpose is I'm a loving teacher and example of simple truths. Mm-hmm. That helps myself and others to awaken to the presence of God in our lives. So we realize that we're here to serve rather than be served. And it takes a while to say, okay, what are a couple of nouns that characterize you? So I said teacher and example. And then what's a couple of verbs that you use to influence people? So I said help and motivate, And then the last part is, what is the perfect world? And so my nouns are, I'm a loving teacher and example of simple truths that helps and motivates. Those are my verbs. And then my picture of a perfect world is where people are awakened to the presence of God in their lives, and they realize that they're here to serve or be served. So it's a process that everybody can engage in, and then your picture of your future is an interesting one. I push people to write your own obituary. And people say, oh, wow, that's really tough deal. Well, why wouldn't you want it? I even made a tape for my own funeral.
So, okay.
I've often said, if you're watching this, I guess I'm not here. But what would you like to say about yourself? What's your obituary? And then final is, what are your values that are going to drive your behavior? So my values are spiritual peace, integrity. My father was retired as an Admiral of the Navy. He said, Ken, in life, the only thing you really have is your integrity. Can people count on you? And then love, and then joy. And then in recent years, I've added, physical well-being, just to keep myself focused on staying healthy.
I guess it was about 5 or 6 years ago through the church, there was a men's retreat, and you took us through that exercise. And it was an amazing thing, just to wake up and set that vision. And unless unless you write something down or have something, the memory fades and the vision falls by the wayside.
That's right. Yeah. You're able to keep it right in front of you.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things is talking about grace, God's unwarranted favor we all receive. In the book, you talk about the habit of grace and the habit of forgiveness. And go ahead, if you would, just touch on that.
Well, it's interesting. I found out that Peter Drucker, who was a kind of a mentor of mine in this area of leadership, that he had become a Christian, and he had been, grew up in Europe, and I think grew up as a Jew. And I said, why did you become a Christian? And Peter had this great German accent. He says, there's no better deal. What do you mean? He said, who else has grace? He says, justice, you do something wrong, you get the penalty you deserve. Mercy, you do something wrong, you get less than you deserve. Grace, you do something wrong, somebody else takes the hit. He said, there's no better deal. Jesus came down to take the hit for us. So grace is just realizing that God loves us no matter what. And if we do something wrong, as long as we fess up to it, and all, and it's really powerful. And what goes hand in hand with that is forgiveness. And the first thing about forgiveness is you got to first forgive yourself.
Yep.
And then if somebody's wronged you, forgive them, and you could go and tell them you forgive them, but don't do that to help think you're going to get something back, from them. You do it to get it out of your system and all. But, that if you don't forgive somebody and you keep on doing it, it's like, just doing your own death all the time.
Now, have you ever had an instance where you had a hard time forgiving somebody for something, or at this point is that natural? I mean, because I think we can all think of an instance where there's somebody that we've had a hard time forgiving, or maybe not quite forgiven. Are there some situations take longer than others?
Yeah, I just think it just depends on what you're doing. I mean, I've had a few people that have really, disappointed me by things that they've done. And I kind of, forgave them in my own heart, but never kind of went to them with it, But I think what you're trying to do is just get it out of your system and all, and just realize that, as my wife says, that they're doing the best they can given their level of awareness, and she says that's really what grace is all about,
Yeah, well said. Another thing, leading positive change. How do we do that?
Well, I think that, I've watched my son Scott, with the company, when you're all of a sudden you're down 30 or 40%, in sales and everything. Well, the first thing is to set the vision and say, okay, given this situation, where are we heading? What are we going to try to do and all? And he comes out with a weekly message to the whole company. And he said that, one of his values is to be forthright, and so what he says in his weekly message is what he knows, what he doesn't know, and what he wished he knew, and it's just but keeping vision out in front with people so that they know what's happening, what's going on and all. So often people will go behind closed doors and start to make changes and all, and the people out there working with them don't know what's going on. All of a sudden, until somebody announces a whole bunch of layoffs, and all that kind of thing. So it's this is continually communicating with your people.
Positive change.
And what has changed is defined as trying to move from a present set of events to another set of events. And the first thing that you need to do is help with people define where we are right now, so they all know that. So Scott was really clear. Here's where we are with present sales. Here's where we are with this and all. And here's where we need to go. And so we've had to make some amazing changes and all, particularly around using technology, because before this COVID thing, all of our training basically was face-to-face. And we did, I think, in 2019 or so, maybe, a couple of hundred, online programs. Here we did 3,500, so we just transferred all of our stuff to high tech. But we needed to do that, and I think it was really clear. And Scott would communicate, what we needed, because all of our training was just drying up. Just like, we've talked, all your speaking dried up,
Yeah, you simply adapt, I guess, to the circumstances.
Yeah.
This book I want to ask you about, Servant Leadership in Action, which came out a couple of years ago. Why don't you explain what's in the book, and then I'm going to ask you also to share a couple of stories from the book.
Well, first I want to say that who's my co-editor? You know that woman at all?
Yeah,
No?
my wife was the co-editor on that book.
He worked so hard on that our editor from Barrett Kohler said, Ken, I think you need to put Renee on the cover of that book. And I said, wow, that's a great idea. And what I wanted to do is that I think servant leadership is so important, and I just didn't want people to think it was just me. So I went out and got, major thinkers to write short articles. Most reading books, the articles are too long. And these articles are all 6 or 7 pages. And so I got, people like Simon Sinek and Brene Brown and Marshall Goldsmith and Patrick Lencioni and, you name them. My wife Margie wrote an article, Lori Beth Jones and Phyllis Henry, who started Lead Like Jesus, wrote articles. And about half the articles were faith-based and half of them weren't. And but we had 45 different people writing articles, including like Jimmy Blanchard, who was president of Synovus, a financial services company that won the most, the best company to work for so many times from Fortune that they asked him to stop applying to the All-Star Group. And he operated completely in a servant leadership. He told people when he took over presidency years and years ago that the Bible was going to be his leadership textbook. And so it's really kind of fun to see those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. The Erwin McManus story. Erwin was one of the contributors. Do you remember that? Remember the story off the top of your head?
Oh, I'm trying to think of it. Why don't you remind me?
Well, he was he got done preaching, was getting out of church. It was pouring where he was, and his wife said, "Hey, we've got a bunch of kids that we've got to that need rides home." And Erwin was tired and basically wanted to go home and was exhausted. And his wife said, "Well, we got to take the kids home." So he shrugged and said, "Okay, I'll do this." They started dropping the kids off. As they were dropping the kids off, they drove by, I'm going to say, a homeless guy in the rain. And his wife said, "Hey, we need to stop and see if we can help that guy." And Erwin said, "No, I want to go home." And she said, "Yeah, we've got to do that." So they ended up dropping off all the kids. And his wife said, "We got to go back and look for that guy." And so they did. They found the guy, and Erwin did something for him, helped him out. And his wife, at the end of witnessing that, said, "That's the greatest sermon you've ever preached."
Yeah, I remember.
It's an incredible story.
Yes, I think that's wonderful. Well, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you got to do something with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why she's saying that's your greatest sermon, because he went back and he reached out to this person, because Jesus, basically said, let's go out and, serve the poor and the hungry and all that. And I think a lot of churches often become social clubs and forget that the group out there. I remember in my first sermon when I took over as interim pastor, I said, I hate to tell you all, but you're not our customer. The only reason you're here is we want to pump you up and give you some good ideas so you can go out there and serve.
Be an ambassador for him. Also, the Tamika Catching story in the book. Tamika played for Pat Summitt at the University of Tennessee.
Yeah.
And her another amazing story. Her dad was a professional ball player. Tamika was deaf, and her coach, Pat Summitt, basically said, Tamika, you need to do something about that. And Tamika thanked her. And it was just that idea that somebody like Pat Summitt could have just let that go, but felt compelled to speak to her about improving that situation. So
yeah, he never wanted to wear hearing aids, because he thought ridiculous. And when Pat said something like that, she said, I better do something about it. Of course, she became one of the greatest college women players at the time.
And anyway, that book again.
That was a great coach.
Yep, Servant Leadership in Action. Ken, anything else I should ask you at this point?
Somebody asked me what is the most important relationship besides the good Lord in my life. Of course, it's Margie. I never forget, I was on a program with Tom Landry, the great Dallas Cowboy coach. Somebody asked him, and he said, Coach, how do you stay so calm in the midst of this crazy game of football? And if you ever remember Landry, he didn't scream and yell, and he just always seemed so calm. And he said to the person who questioned, he said, it was pretty easy for me. He said, I have my priorities in order. He said, first comes God, second comes my wife, third comes my family, and fourth comes my job. So if I lose a game on Sunday, I got a lot left over. He said, unfortunately, some people out there, when they lose a game on Sunday, they have nothing left over because they think they are their performance. And he said, no, I am my relationship to the Lord, my wife, and my family.
Yeah, that's the proper perspective. So, Ken, how long? Speaking of Margie, how long have the two of you been married now?
Next year it will be 60 years. How's that?
Congratulations.
She was only 10 when I married her, really.
So here's the question now, the follow-up question: that been married 60 years. How many of those years have been happy years?
Well, I'd say 60 of them.
Good answer.
We had some issues, when I was out traveling a lot and Margie was working on her doctor's degree, and we were kind of passing it the night. So we had to go and get some counseling just to get back to
okay.
And so that was a interesting time, and overall it's really been good. But the fact we've been willing to get the help, we've gone to Marriage Encounter, which the Catholic Church started, which is fabulous, and we've just done a lot of stuff, and I'm actually doing a session for our church on leading your family like Jesus, So I think it's important.
Okay. Well, Ken, I appreciate your time. I know that you are you're on Facebook. You're also on LinkedIn. And my wife is saying something. Twitter. So if people want to follow up with you and follow you, thank you for your time.
Also look up leadlikejesus.com.
Thank you.
Or Ken Blanchard Companies.com, and they can find out what we're all doing, and it's fun. And your wife Renee, you married way above yourself.
I know that, and Ken reminds me every time we get together. He reminds me of that. So, Ken, thank you again. Appreciate your time.
All right, take care of yourself. God bless.
Thank you. Bye.